For teams not coming off of a national championship, the offseason is a period in which you can think about what might be. And with some, that means some revisionist history has happened because Michigan, a team that many other teams hate, they won the national championship. Thus, there's a bunch of ridiculousness out there, whether it's from Ohio State, Notre Dame, Michigan State. And I even have a gripe to pick with some of you Michigan fans for a completely undeterred reason. We're going to get to all that here on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday. We're back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. Easily, with my thoughts deterred by trains, apparently, because as soon as the train came, or it came right there in the beginning, you probably can't hear it on the broadcast. I've got good windows, but I can still hear it myself. Anyhow, a bunch of little things that I want to get into. It kind of goes back to last week. There's that's where it kind of I planned on before getting under the weather, of which I'm still kind of struggling with. That's where I planned on addressing some of these things that we've seen here. But just to show how soft-skinned Ohio State fans, now granted I didn't specify what the reason was for my tweet on July 4th when I put Oregon and Michigan football fans right now and it showed them shaking hands. But what the internet was abuzz about at that time, in that moment, was Pete Thamel ruining Decorian Moore's commitment to Oregon over Ohio State and others. And yet Ohio State fans took it and ran with it and started getting into my mentions and stuff like that. What it was like, yes, I didn't add full context, but it was that kind of Carly Simon, you're so vain, you probably think this tweet is about you, because that's what they're all about. But regardless, the softest fan base continues to be soft, and you see that in various different iterations, such as Tate from Barstool Ohio State constantly complaining about the so-called anti-Ohio State bias in the game. This, besides the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, Ohio State, and I'd have to look it up, and I will do that right now. I think Ohio State is at or near the very, very top of the EA Sports rankings. I think, let's see. I thought I could pull it up quickly. I can't. EA College Football 25 team rankings. Number 2 behind Georgia. So it's not like if they're being disrespected, I mean, I think it makes sense to be disrespected by an equally as loaded team that has won 2 of the last 3 national championships, right? But because they're showing a surrender cobra or something of that nature, they're very upset. Meanwhile, you see a lot of Ohio State fans kind of preemptively celebrating the idea that they get to beat Michigan in the game. That's just sad and soft behavior. But we will turn our face from Ohio State a little bit here because we spend enough time talking about them. And let's talk about Notre Dame for a minute, because we don't spend any time talking about the rival also to the south, but to the southwest rather than to the kind of straight south. And that's Notre Dame, because Notre Dame, their fans, after losing Ivan Taylor, their top-rated defensive prospect that they had committed in 2025, they have gone to great lengths to kind of show, and they were doing this kind of before, they have their feud with E.J. Holland, in which E.J. is the type of person that welcomes controversy. That is not who I am, personally. Like, I cannot relate to that. I do not like controversy, which is one of the reasons I feel uncomfortable with a lot of the things that I've had to report in the last year, which has garnered me some notoriety. I'm not comfortable with the spotlight, nor am I comfortable with notoriety. But there is certainly they've had a lot of different viewpoints on what their team is and the way that they recruit, right? Because they were saying 0 for 9, everyone Michigan's targeted 0 for 9 as far as the recruits they brought in, which is somewhat true, somewhat, not fully. You know, they have gotten some really good guys to join the class that Michigan really wanted. Jadon Blair being most recent. You look at a guy like Will Black that Michigan was targeting earlier in the cycle, and he ends up going there. And obviously, there's a Michigan-Notre Dame battle when it comes to Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. So they certainly have their battles going. But then you start seeing things like, oh, Notre Dame didn't want any of the guys that ended up like flipping from, or, you know, these guys weren't takes. And I'll give you Brandon Hillman because he flat out said like he did not get accepted into Notre Dame. But those who try to make it like, well, you have to understand how not academics, but admissions work for different schools. Michigan has similarly rigorous admissions as Notre Dame, but just because one gets into one doesn't mean one's going to get in the other. It's the same reason why sometimes you see someone get into, you know, one equal school and not get into another. There's different things that kind of go along with it. But the fact that they try to say like, oh, we didn't want Owen Wafel, we didn't want Greg Crippen, we didn't want Amarian Walker, we didn't want, and you know, Owen Wafel's dad actually pushes back on that. He went onto Twitter and said like, this is provably false, this narrative that you're creating that Owen was dropped or whatever they're trying to claim at this point. So they, for a program that is equally as storied as Michigan, and it is, but it's had a lot less recent overall success. Now, they did make the college football playoff twice before Michigan made it once. That is true. They made a national championship in 2012, I believe. Yet they don't have really many accolades. And in part, it's been in a schedule that sometimes is harder than most, and sometimes it's way weaker. Because if USC isn't very good, which it hasn't been for a while, that really drops down your strength of schedule. And considering that there was like this coronation of Marcus Freeman before he's done anything, and he still has done nothing. Now, they do just seem to be on the ascent, but just because you are on the ascent doesn't mean the climb that we always talk about is actually happening, right? Going from abysmal 2 years ago to serviceable last year does not mean, as Michigan fans, you can attest, does not mean that things are necessarily going to be hunky-dory. Michigan saw 2 10-3 seasons before going 8-5, right? And then another 10-3 season, and then 9-4, then 2-10 before they finally got over the hump, right? So there are a lot of these instances where Notre Dame fans, they just claim superiority without actually having it. And just live in reality is kind of all I'm saying. Like Notre Dame, you haven't done anything in a long time overall. Just like Michigan had not done anything for a long time. But guess what? It has now. Currently, even though it's being counted out and many are looking at Notre Dame and saying, oh, that might be in a better spot to do some damage. Perhaps the schedule is amenable to that, depending on how week one at Texas A&M goes. It's not necessarily as rosy as you might think, because they still have to do what they haven't done in some time. And with a coach, by the way, that hasn't proven that he can. I'm sorry, that's just facts. Now, could he? Absolutely. It's possible, but don't know if it's probable until we see it. I'm going to get to the Michigan State and to the Michigan fans that I have a gripe with, it's not even that I have a gripe with them. They have a gripe with me. I'm going to kind of address that. But we'll get to that here in just a moment. But before we do, passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home the huge wins rather than the winning trophy. Not sure that there is a winning trophy for daily drivers. Anyway, keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Thank you much, by the way, for your patience with me over the last 2 weeks. I know we're intermittent generally. We've been more intermittent than normal the last couple weeks as I've continued to fight with whatever health issues that I've had. I should, unlike being how a lot of, people say go to the doctor. Sarah tells me you should go to the doctor. But being a man, I don't. But today's the first day that I kind of feel moderately normal, so that's good. So we will have a show tomorrow. The mailbag, might record it tonight just to make sure it gets out tomorrow. That's actually my plan as of right now, assuming everything holds. So continue to get your questions into the mailbag until you see it up. And then if you aren't in it, it's probably because I ended up pre-recording it. But we're in the same clothes I am today. That proves it if you're watching it on YouTube. All right, Michigan State fans, I'm not going to leave you out, because you have had an amazing time at doing what you do best, and that's being Mac in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I'm just gonna go over there. I'm gonna neutralize the threat. I'm gonna do a quick backflip, yada yada yada. Which it's like you've never done a backflip in your life, and they're like, oh, okay, well, no, I can and I will, but they can't and they haven't. To kind of Ron Howard this thing. But after Michigan got out to a rocky start in recruiting in the month of July with Kamar Archie, Hardy Watts, Jamari Earls, some of these guys going elsewhere, Marco Jones, one of their sites decided that it was going to basically say, actually, Jonathan Smith is recruiting better than Sharon Moore. And where does Michigan State rank out of 18 Big Ten teams? Well, with 15 commits, 0 4-stars committed, it is 14th out of 18. Now, that's as of right now. I don't know where they ranked then, but they had gotten a couple 3-star commits, and they're all like, see, it's us. We are Ohio State. We're the ones. And then fast forward to Monday, and Michigan gets commitments from both Andrew Olesh and Ivan Taylor flips from Notre Dame. So hilarity ensues as far as the internet is concerned, because if there's any team right now that can't really talk smack on recruiting, it's Michigan State. That's like Iowa, who's dead last at the moment, who actually has a better claim to talk smack with 12 commits, but 4 4-stars and 7 3-stars, according to the 24/7 Sports composite. Michigan State is just with 3 more commitments, and all of them are 3-stars. They have they don't have the lowest per recruit ranking at 86.48. I think it might be pretty close to it though. Second lowest. Yeah, second lowest in the entire conference. The only team, or third lowest. The only teams that are not recruiting as high of a clip is Northwestern, who equally has 15 3-star commitments, but they have 18 commits overall. So do your math there. And Indiana, who has 21 commitments, similar deal, 1 4-star, 16 3-stars. Those are the two that have lower ratings than Michigan State. Michigan, by contrast, has a recruiting ranking of, with 15 commits, same amount, an average of 91.85. In the overall look at Michigan's currently number 12 in the team rankings. And to find Michigan State, you've got to hit load more and sit there and wait for a second to see that they're 51st in the country. So they will argue, well, we always beat Michigan with less talent. That has been true for some coaches. It was true for Mark D'Antonio, although a lot of his guys were either developed well or under-recruited. So that's my gripe with Michigan State fans. I'm coming for you all in a friendly way. So Michigan fans, what do I have to say to you? And it's not a lot of you, and I haven't even read this thread, but supposedly there was a thread on MGO blog bashing me to shreds, as I was told by someone, or ripping me to shreds, bashing me, whatever. And I just asked, what is this about? And it naturally was about the NCAA stuff. And he said that the NCAA was going to drop their notice of allegations. That was the intel at the time. And I actually, I corroborated that with two other reporters in the Michigan beat, two people you know. Now, and they'd heard the same thing. Now, just because that's what we were hearing, because that's what the NCAA was telling lawyers of parties involved, doesn't mean that the NCAA is going to adhere to that timeline, because they've told those lawyers who have told some of us, right? And I actually did a full-on show where I explained that. Now, does that mean I was wrong? Yes, it does mean I was wrong there. But that was the intel at the time. That's the thing. Intel sometimes changes, and you have to roll with the punches when it comes to those types of things. It's the same way that when I told you that Xavier Worthy was going to remain in the class, and I ended up being wrong, and I eventually told you the person who told me that was Josh Gaddis, you'd be like, yeah, okay, well, if you're being told that in that moment, you're going to believe it, okay? That's how the world works sometimes. Sometimes you're told something from reputable sources and things change. That, if you want to hold that as a ding against me, fine. But when it comes to me if anyone who wants to claim that I'm trying to be something that I'm not, I'm just telling you what I'm being told, okay? And for those there's a lot of you that want information. You want all the information. I can't give you everything that's being told to me at all times, but I try to give you what I can. And sometimes things change. I don't know what's changed behind the NCAA. I don't have a direct source to the NCAA. And I'll be the first to tell you that. But for those who hold it against me, I'm sorry that you hold it against me. If you feel like the show isn't one for you, you can make that decision. But I stand by what I was told. And we'll see what happens, right? If something drops tomorrow, something drops August, maybe we'll know why there was a delay. It could drop in January, who knows? But it's clear to me, more so, why have things changed? Because the NCAA is still trying to dig. They're still trying to find something to pin Michigan on, and it hasn't been able to do it. So in a weird way, this is good news for Michigan, because they still have yet to be able to pin Michigan on anything of huge substance at this point. So once it does drop, judge me by that. And if I'm wrong, then no, it's just what the world is. But I would bet that I'm not. All right. So that is that. All right. I want to talk about Michigan's defensive line, because as much as it gets a lot of credence, in some ways, I still think it's weirdly underrated. So I want to kind of address that with some a conversation that I had a few weeks ago, mixed with some kind of love that some linemen are currently getting. So we'll get to that here in just a moment. Before we do, I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. Sometimes maybe baseball, but just because it's so far away from football. Baseball's we've got a long ways to go, baby. But as the playoffs have wound down, we get fewer games, just baseball games. It used to be my favorite sport, but and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every single day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com, start making the most out of your summer. And if you're into it with baseball, just remember that FanDuel is official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, so let's finish up talking about the Michigan defensive line, because there have been a couple pieces that I've put out on Wolverines Wire that are discussing some of these other some of these defensive linemen that Michigan has. So you look at the fact that ESPN's Jordan Reed, Michigan's not one that tends to get a lot of love from the ESPN analysts, as we all know. I mean, they do get love, but not necessarily as much as some other schools. And usually it's Mason Graham that gets all the love. But Jordan Reed, he tweets out a video of Mason Graham against Washington. And he says, Michigan interior defensive lineman Kenneth Grant, quick twitch and light-footed athlete, explosive power to disrupt on the first level. Lots of potential with this prospect. And I think that people are really kind of sleeping on Kenneth Grant to some degree from a national perspective. Not in Ann Arbor, not if you're a Michigan fan, but from a national perspective. As everyone sits there and looks at Mason Graham, rightfully so, some say that Mason Graham might be the best pound-for-pound player in college football this year. And I think that is certainly a possibility. I think if, you could look at some others. I mean, even Will Johnson could be that guy. You look at like a Travis Hunter, and he could be a three-way player that could just have a massive impact on three different levels of the game. But Mason Graham certainly has the potential to being a game wrecker. Now, why does that matter with Kenneth Grant? Well, because you can't double just one of them. You kind of have to take over everything with both of them. And I was talking to someone that has pretty good knowledge of how things work and has seen practices and such. And they were telling me, like, listen, when it comes to the edge rushers, Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart, those guys are better than their predecessors, Jalen Harrell and Braden McGregor. Different types of players, of course, right? In some ways, right? You look at Josiah as being more of the Jalen type role, kind of that outside linebacker, and you look at Derek Moore as being that Braden McGregor role. But that they had said, and actually I'm pretty sure I also got this from someone who was in the building as well, that currently still works in the building, that the thing about those two guys is the reason why we didn't see more of them is just because they were behind experience. And Michigan for often was trusting experience. It's no mistake that foursome, and I've said this a ton of times, but it's no mistake that foursome was the group that was on the field for that final play against Alabama. Because when I don't even have a good idiom for this, but when it came down to it, I was going to try to make something up. And I was like, when nuts come down to bolts or when dollars come to biscuits, none of those things make sense. But when it came down to brass tacks, as close as I'm going to get with the idiom, Michigan said, what is the best foursome that we can have out there? And it was the guys that you're going to see starting this year. And I think the great thing is Mason's going to get a ton of attention. We saw that with, I think Mason in part did he was still a game wrecker. And at times earlier in the season, I feel like he benefited from Chris Jenkins getting that respect. It's kind of the same reason why Chris Jenkins was able to get break free in 2022 because of the respect that Mozzie Smith was getting. I think now you've got two bona fide guys that you have to double team in the middle. And then you've got two guys that are just absolute game wreckers on the edges. And I think that even though Kenneth Grant doesn't get as much talk as he should, and I feel like there is some disrespect there, and Mason Graham's had his levels of disrespect, is not even being named a first-team All-American in preseason All-American by Walter Camp, I believe it was. You also have two defensive ends that don't get mentioned on any list, right? Everyone's like, and rightfully so, loves to look at Jack Sawyer. They'll add JT Tumalau on that list because of whatever he's going to do to Penn State this year, right? But they just, I don't think that they're ready for the fact that Michigan's got two very capable and potentially elite edge rushers. You add to the mix that you've got the linebackers behind them that are really, really good, and a secondary that very well could be as well. I think it's an absolute dream scenario for Michigan's defense. Like, this is one of those cases where I hope I'm not wrong, but I would be shocked if this Michigan defense isn't just like an absolute unit. I'm talking top two and probably not as low as two type of defense. And I understand there is a bias that comes with that. But I just look at it from top to bottom, and I think that if you're a Michigan fan, you look at what you have and you say, a lot of these guys were guys we were rolling with last year and able to hold Ohio State to 24 points, Washington to 13, Alabama to 20. Like, I'll take that over whatever Ohio State has, whatever Georgia has, whatever anyone else has at this point. And if Michigan wins in week 2, it's going to be in large part, I mean, yes, it will require some offensive work unless the defense just gets a bunch of turnovers, which is certainly possible. But I think it will all come from what happens up front. And I think that defensive front is just absolutely nasty for Michigan. So I'm excited to see it. I think that's where I think that you look at what it already is, you look at the guys who have already played, and you think about the potential of some of these guys. We hear about TJ Guy, hear about Eno Etta, and some of these other guys that very well could kind of work their way in, and it becomes really, really very interesting. Heck, you add in Dominic Nichols, who's gotten a lot of publicity as a freshman early enrollee. Sharon Moore mentioned him at the golf outing a couple weeks ago, as well as being a guy that is going to potentially be a year 1 impact player. I mean, there's just a lot to really like about that defensive front. So I'm excited to see what it is. All right. Get your questions in for the mailbag. Again, we'll record either tonight or hopefully early tomorrow, assuming that the health stands up and all of that. So pray for me, because I'm just tired of feeling terrible every single day. It's not been a fun week and a half since July 3rd, really. But yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll be talking to you again soon. Peace.